Hi friends! Today I'm going to talk about the fantastic 2022 drama called Spiderhead. It is an ultra-modern prison that looks more like a hotel. The inmates there live under a more lenient regime, are allowed to go for walks, interact with each other, and have the opportunity to reduce their sentences and earn bonuses. But all of this doesn't come for free. At Spiderhead, drug trials are conducted and not all of them are harmless. To be fair, it should be noted that all experiments are voluntary, and each inmate has the right to refuse and return to a standard cell in another prison. Ray, one of the inmates, sits in a chair in front of a one-way mirror, and Steve announces the start of the trial, administering the drug into the guy's bloodstream. Within a minute, the test subject is given the first dose of the drug, and they start reading simple jokes to him, which make Ray laugh hysterically. When the jokes are replaced with frightening facts, the guy's reaction remains the same. Ray continues to laugh hysterically. Another morning in Spiderhead is no different from the previous ones. The inmates are woken up over the loudspeaker, where the name of the person participating in today's trials is also announced. Steve asks Jeff if he's ready to try out the new N40 compound, which hasn't been administered to anyone before, and the guy easily agrees to take part in the experiment. In addition to the test drug, he is also given another one that activates the speech centers of the brain, and Jeff manages to describe his condition in detail, mentioning even the smallest details. After returning to the Spiderhead facility, Jeff meets with Lizzie and tells her about his walk today. Unfortunately, the guy can't tell her everything he saw, because after the drug that enhances vocabulary, there's a side effect. Jeff can't string even a few words together. The only thing the guy remembers is that everything around him during the experiment, whether it was flowers or factory pipes, filled him with an overwhelming surge of love and admiration. In the evening, sitting in bed before sleep, Jeff recalls how he ended up in prison. While hanging out with a friend at a party, the guys decided to go for a drive, and an intoxicated Jeff got behind the wheel. The next day, the trials of N40, or as it was now called, Cupid, continue. But this time, Jeff isn't participating alone. He's paired with Heather, a bold girl who, just seconds after the drug is administered, changes her opinion about her partner. The pair's conversation lasts only a few seconds before they can't resist and end up doing all sorts of things several times. They couldn't care less that they're being watched and even filmed, since the substance completely shuts off their minds. The process ends with the young people confessing their love for each other, which delights Steve, and he instructs his partner Mark to closely monitor the subjects to see how they behave once the drug's effects wear off. The pair feels awkward about what happened and tries not to talk about it with anyone. Jeff, as before, spends his free time with Lizzie, not telling her what happened during the trial, and tries to avoid running into Heather. The next day, he is given the same Cupid drug, only in a double dose, and instead of Heather, there is an older woman in the room, whom a sober Jeff looks at with disgust. But as soon as the substance enters his bloodstream, the guy ends up doing all sorts of things with her as well. After this trial, Jeff asks Mark to take him off kitchen duty, where he works together with Lizzie, because he feels awkward continuing to interact with his friend. Steve brings Jeff to the laboratory, but this time puts him behind the glass, and shows him that both of his partners from the previous trials are sitting in the experiment room. The supervisor offers Jeff a choice. He must decide which of the two girls he is willing to inject with a drug that causes intense episodes of fear and pain. But Jeff can't choose. He doesn't care about either of the girls, but he also can't wish them any harm. In the end, the girls are simply released and the experiment is cancelled. Granted another Friday outing, Jeff calls his girlfriend, the one who was with him on the night of the accident, but once again, he only gets her voicemail. Jeff spends the evening with Lizzie, giving her a small Christmas surprise. Back in his usual chair in the lab, Jeff finds himself facing Rogan, a huge inmate covered in tattoos. He recalls everything that happened with the girls in the previous days and refuses to consent to the experiment, not wanting them to do just anything to him now. But nothing happens, and after a couple of minutes of silence, the men are simply let go. Jeff realizes what has happened. He and Rogan had both been partners of one of the female inmates, and now she was supposed to choose which of them would be injected with the drug Dumanix. Bursting into Steve's office, Jeff confirms his suspicions when he sees Heather there. Moreover, the doctor doesn't even argue with the inmate. On the contrary, he shows him a chart detailing who is supposed to become intimate with whom under the influence of the drug. In response to the guy's complaints, Steve reminds him that being at Spiderhead is a privilege, and if he's not satisfied with something, he can be transferred to a regular prison. Only then, he would lose any hope of early release. Getting the hint, the next time Jeff sits in the same room with Rogan without any hysterics. Steve sends Mark off for the weekend, advising his friend to have a good time on the mainland. The director himself injects himself with Cupid to experience the euphoria he had previously only witnessed in his subjects. The trials continue, and Steve warns Jeff that he will still have to use Dorminex on the women, as some committee is demanding the experiment's integrity. Jeff tries to explain that he doesn't want anyone to experience the effects of this substance, regardless of how he feels about the women. But the director is adamant, and once again reminds Jeff of all the privileges he enjoys by cooperating with them. Not wanting to return to a regular prison, Jeff agrees to administer Dorminex to Heather. Heather starts to cry and panic, but the management calmly records the data, listening to Jeff's comments, which show no hint of romantic feelings. The goal of the experiment is achieved, and Steve plans to end it, but a leak occurs and Heather loses control. The girl gets hold of a sharp object and puts an end to her suffering caused by the drug. While Steve and Mark fuss over the girl, Jeff notices the keys the boss lost and finds a notebook with notes about upcoming experiments, as well as a lottery ticket with the same numbers as the names of the drugs they've been given. Noticing that Steve is no longer behind the glass, Jeff manages to close the safe and toss the keys back so the doctor won't realize his secret has been discovered. Steve warns Mark that if anyone finds out what happened to Heather and he has to answer for it, he'll drag down everyone who took part in the experiment with him. Lizzie is taking part in the trials for the first time, and the first thing she's injected with is Dominex. After what she's been through, the girl meets Jeff in a secluded spot and shares her feelings with him. She admits that she's not sure Spiderhead is any better than a regular maximum security prison. Jeff, in turn, also opens up to his friend and confesses to her that on the night he got into the accident, there was not only his friend in the car, but also his beloved girlfriend, who didn't survive the ride. That's why he endures the drug trials, hoping to atone for his guilt this way. The couple's honest conversation leads to them spending the night together. Steve quickly figures out the close relationship between his subjects and decides to use this connection for his own purposes. When Jeff comes in for the next trial, he learns that today he must either agree to have Lizzie injected with Darkenflox or leave Spiderhead. Jeff refuses, but the doctor gives him a chance to postpone the experiment until morning, and then confronts the rebellious young man, now armed with Lizzie's personal file. It turns out that the crime the girl is imprisoned for is so terrible for her that no Darkenflox could make her feel worse. Steve watches with pleasure as the guy turns the dosage dial to maximum, but he quickly realizes that the guy intends to experiment on him, not on his girlfriend. Mark, seeing that he, along with the inmates, had fallen into Steve's trap, decided to fix the situation and handed the remote to Jeff. The inmate gets all the information he needs from Steve and convinces him to open the main exit so that he and Lizzie can leave the prison. But the warden manages to snatch the remote and administer the girl the maximum dose of N40, causing her excruciating suffering, after which he smashes the smartphone so that no one can override his command. The couple manages to break free from the effects of the drugs and run out of the laboratory, but at that moment Steve announces over the loudspeaker that because of the escapees, everyone else will be sent back to their cells, bringing an end to their comfortable lives. A manhunt for Jeff and Lizzie begins. Dozens of hardened criminals, including the huge tattooed Rogan, are planning to take revenge on the couple who deprived them of all the perks of this facility. Steve himself tries to escape with the drugs as police boats, called by Mark, are about to reach Spiderhead. Steve manages to leave the facility and take off in a small plane before the cops arrive. But since his control panel is broken, the drugs are being pumped into his bloodstream in huge quantities, all mixed together. Another surge of Cupid causes him to be filled with awe, and the man turns the plane toward a tiny rocky island, seeing it as a paradise. Mark, on the last boat, sees his former boss circling over the sea and then crashing into the rocks. Jeff and Lizzie steal a boat and manage to get away before the police arrive. Happy and free, the young people only regret that Steve never invented a drug that could induce self-forgiveness. Friends, thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think about this film, and please don't forget to support us with likes and by subscribing.